Zeke looked to the door upon hearing the voice from outside. Damn, brakes aren't working for shit, someone outside the door spat. It sounded like Troy. So far, Zeke did not like Troy one bit. He made Nick look a little respectful and patient young man comparison. You okay? Sarah asked. She must have been worried since she nearly collided with the back of the truck. Yeah, Zeke said. It was all he could get before the door of the truck opened. The free people stood at the entrance of the door. Troy and Bonnie were the two of the people, while the third person was an African-American woman. All right, up and at 'em, the woman said. The group had no choice but to comply with the order. There wasn't much else they could do. Besides, one of the guards were armed with the assault rifle, and it would be pretty much a death sentence to disobey their orders. Rebecca picked up Genevieve while Alvin got the toddler's supplies. The rest of the group followed the woman as she made the gesture to follow. Zeke looked around. It looked like almost a docking bay of a store. He heard the door of the truck closed a couple of minutes. After he left the truck, he saw a woman approach the two pairs of double doors. She had opened the doors which led to a store. The store was huge. There were several checkout lanes and shelves throughout the store. Some of the shelves had food and supplies on it. What is this place? Zeke asked Sarah. House. It's a really bad place, Sarah replied. She sounded sad, but she didn't want to be back at her old community. We've got some familiar faces back with us tonight, Carver said. He must have been speaking through the PA system. Now I know some of you are all confused as to why we bring some of these people back when they left us when they did. I think I got an idea, the woman muttered. It may not come out all at once, Carver continued over the PA, but time will heal these wounds, so be patient with them until it does. And also solace is in taking knowing here that help us make this home a better place. Zeke looked around several armed guards throughout the community. This was worse than he thought. None of the guards seemed very happy over the group, even for those who weren't part of the original group that left. What the hell is this? Zeke muttered. It felt like he was going back in no time to his abusive father, who had stared him down before beating him. It was extremely imitating, and it made him very tense. Why would stop any of these people from shooting at him? The hostile groups might have captured him before, but they were not as strong in the number. All these feelings of anger, betrayal, hate, they're all valid, Carver said over the PA. No one needs to forget what they did, but we have to find it in our hearts to forgive them. Carver was now visible in the office that overlooked the hardware store. He looked down at the group with a victorious smirk on his face. It made it worse with Clementine being next to him. It looked like she had been beaten on the way to house. There were several bruises on her face. Rebecca gasped upon seeing the child. My poor baby! What is he doing to her? Rebecca said. She sounded like she was going to cry. That frickin' son of a bitch! I'm gonna kill him! Kenny snapped. He went out to step out of his way, but was stopped by Troy. Make my day, asshole. I'll blow your frickin' brains out, Troy snapped. Kenny growled as he stared back at him. Kenny, please, Sarita said as she took his hand. He hesitated before he finally backed down. The group continued. There was nothing they could do to help Clementine, especially when every guard in the community was armed. Come on, we need you for something, Troy said to Carlos. Can it wait until morning? We're all exhausted, Troy, Carlos said. We're all exhausted. Just come the fuck on, Troy said. Carlos sighed and followed Troy over to the woman. Sarah had stopped to look over at her dad, and Zeke joined her. He knew that they couldn't stop. I need him. I need my dad. He's all I got left, Sarah said. I know, but he'll be back. We should keep going. These guys don't appear very hospitable, Zeke said. Sarah knew that he was right. They continued forward, and with Sarah staying closer to Zeke. They approached the garage door where the rest of the group was. Zeke was glad that he was no longer around the guards. The hateful stare that they shared reminded him so much of his father. Intimidation. That was something his own father used against him, and it was something that the guards were doing. Zeke remembered how he could never fight back since his father was always stronger than him. Here Zeke couldn't fight back because they outnumbered him and had more firepower. What's worse is they could kill someone that he cared about. His thoughts were soon interrupted when he heard Bonnie. "Make sure you're all off the fence," Bonnie said. "Bill could see if you're messing with it." She opened the garage door. They all entered the courtyard, which consisted of a fire pit, lawn chairs that surrounded the fire pit, and next to the fire pit were a couple of picnic tables. Furthest from the fire pit was a plywood, which must have acted as a bedding. Bonnie and Troy proceeded to cut the group members' bindings off. Zeke noticed that Rebecca placed Genevieve on the ground. It didn't seem like the toddler wanted to explore, and Zeke couldn't blame her. It was rather dark since they were outside, and she must have thought that they were vulnerable to the walkers. They finished by cutting off Zeke and Sarah's bindings off. "Y'all better get some rest. There ain't gonna be much work for you tomorrow. You're gonna be working hard," Troy said. "That's for you," Bonnie said as she gestured to the cot adjacent to the garage door. "Yeah, it would be," Rebecca muttered. "Frickin' Bill. Leaves me out in the cold and takes away my child, but at least I'll be comfortable." "Hey, guys," a man said. Rebecca looked over and exclaimed, "Reggie!" She gasped upon seeing him and went up to him. "I'm so sorry." She proceeded to hug him. "I'm so sorry." They all separated from the hug, and Rebecca looked at the stump that was left of his arm where it used to be. "What did they do to you?" "This could have been worse, trust me," Reggie said. "I'm lucky to be alive." "It's good to see you again," Luke said as she walked up to Reggie with a smile forming on his face. "Good to see you as well. I wish it was better circumstances," Reggie said. "Me too," Luke said. "We didn't know what happened to you after we escaped. We feared the worst," Alvin said. "Well, I hadn't had another chance," Reggie said. "They didn't kill me." "Listen, I'm sorry we left you what we did," Luke said. "Don't be," Reggie said. "There's no hard feelings. Besides, I probably would have died if you hadn't got me out of there. I was bleeding out." Zeke turned to Sarah and said, "Do you know about this Reggie guy?" "Are you sure you want my opinion?" Sarah muttered as she looked down with a frown. "Hey, what's wrong?" Zeke said. He went up to grab her, but she pulled away from him. "Sarah?" She looked up at her. "I kept thinking of how this is my fault. If I hadn't trusted Bonnie, then—" "It's not your fault," Zeke said. "She betrayed you. You couldn't have known this was going to happen." "Still, you had a clear shot of her. You could have stopped this whole thing, but then I got in the way," Sarah said. "Sarah, we're all in this together. Sure, you were a little bit naive back there, but that's what I love about you. You're willing to do the best part of people. Well, I'm more, cynical," Zeke said. "I don't want you to change the way you are because, frankly, there's enough cynical people in the world as it is." Sarah looked up at him and smiled at Zeke. "Thanks, Zeke." She went over and hugged her boyfriend, who hugged her back. He enjoyed her embrace. It's the same embrace that had been helped him through much of his problems. And pretty much, if anything, Sarah had made him feel at peace, more so than anyone else his entire life. "It's a good thing they cut it off immediately," Reggie said. Sarah and Zeke separated from the hug and looked over to Reggie, who was finished telling the story of what had happened after the group left. "Saved my life." "Zeke!" "Hey," Sarah said. Zeke looked at the girl. She shielded away a bit from the glance and had a nervous look on her face. "Thanks for not being mad at me." "You don't have to thank me for that," Zeke said. "I love you, Sarah. And besides, I don't think anyone can stay mad at you after you start acting cute." Sarah looked up at her with her cheeks flushed red. She was even cuter now, if that was even possible. Zeke wanted to forget about everything. He almost wanted to kiss her and cuddle up to her for the rest of the evening without having anyone staring at them. In fact, at this point, they just didn't care what either of them were saying. But of course, he wanted to cuddle up with her that evening at the ski lodge after gun practice, but it never happened. Zeke could hear Troy talking with Reggie. He didn't care what either of them were saying. All he could do was look at Sarah and blushing. "I love you too. You want to go somewhere a little more private? I don't think I want to try kissing again." "I would like that," Zeke said. The two proceeded to walk away from the group. The two were careful not to draw too much attention to themselves. They walked over past a yard that seemed isolated from there. Zeke and Sarah began to kiss unlike last time. It wasn't awkward at all. Zeke could feel his body quiver as he continued to kiss the girl. Sarah must have felt the same since her kiss was a little more passionate this time. Unlike any other feeling Zeke had never experienced. After a minute or two, the cold won out over their passionate kissing. Sarah had a huge smile on her face. "That was cool. I feel so much better than our first kiss," Sarah said. "Definitely," Zeke said. "Want to go back and join the others before we get freeze over here?" "Yeah, that might be best," Sarah said. "Okay, before we do, I gotta ask you something. Do you want to cuddle tonight when we go to bed?" Zeke asked. You could tell he was blushing now. Sarah nodded her head. "Yeah, I like that," Sarah said. "And you're pretty cute when you start blushing." Zeke could only rub the back of his head in response. He tried to calm himself down, and Sarah rejoined his group. "Where did you two run off to?" Luke asked. "Nowhere in particular," Sarah said. "Making out, huh?" Matthew asked. "Walt and I usually need some alone time too." "We weren't making out," Zeke said. "Yeah, right. I wasn't born yesterday," Matthew said. The two teenagers didn't know what to say in response. "Whoa, Sarah, I didn't know he was your boyfriend," Reggie said to the girl. "Yeah, he's the best boyfriend I could ever ask for," Sarah said. Rebecca smiled at this as she continued to give Genevieve her bottle. She must have been happy for the two. She looked back down to Genevieve and said, "Won't be long until she's too old for this." "That's still a ways off, dear," Alvin said. Zeke rubbed the back of his head again, and he said, "Yeah, sorry I haven't been paying much attention to her. I could try and look after her tomorrow." The two adults exchanged glances before looking over to Zeke. "Zeke, try not to get too mad, but Beck and I are wanting to give Genevieve as part of the family. We want her as our daughter," Alvin said. Zeke's eyes widened. He wasn't so sure what to say. A part of him was sad that other people wanted to look after the toddler rather than him, while Omi did his best to look after Genevieve. He was still heartbroken over Krista's death. This prevented him from being the parent that he wanted to be. He sometimes was rather harsh and distant. Zeke saw that Genevieve was another chance of being an older brother. However, he shrugged about being the older brother this time, especially when some of the underlying issues were coming to the surface. There was something wrong with him and he knew it. It wasn't healthy for a toddler to be around someone like him if he did a good job expressing those problems. "Sweetie, I know this is a lot to take in, but you're still a child. We want to have a sense of childhood and less responsibility. You need time for yourself. You're still an important person in her life, but she needs a family with healthy development," Rebecca said, just like how Clem needed a family. "Yeah, you're right," Zeke said. "Jen will be happy with you guys." "Thanks, Zeke. I know this isn't easy for you, but this will make Genevieve happy," Alvin said. "I hope so," Zeke said. The rest of the night was uneventful for the most part. Time seemed to move slowly, especially since most of the group was cold from the weather. Eventually the garage door opened and Troy came into the yard with Carlos by his side. "Dad!" Sarah said. She got up and went over to hug the man. Troy returned the hug, but the reunion was short-lived. "All right, get your asses to bed now," Troy snapped. "I'm shooting any of you dumbasses if I see you wandering around before morning." With that, he turned and left the group. The group members made their way over to plywood, and wasn't much of a choice they had. Zeke lay down on the plywood with Sarah laying next to him. She took off her glasses and placed them away from her so they wouldn't get crushed by her or Zeke. She cuddled up next to him, which Zeke placed an arm around her. It wasn't long until they had fallen asleep. Zeke mumbled upon hearing someone's boot hit his arm. He looked at him to see Troy. He glared at the two. "What do you two want?" Zeke muttered. "It's time to get up. Bill's gonna have a talk to you," Troy said. "Whatever," Zeke muttered. He turned to Sarah and nudged her awake. "What's going on?" Sarah asked. A yawn escaped her lips. "Time to get up. His Royal Highness has demanded an audience," Zeke said in a mocking tone of voice. "Hey, you ought to show some respect," Troy snapped. Zeke got up and said, "Why would I ever respect some psycho who's holding a captive and who has made 2 attempts on my life so far?" Troy glared at Zeke before Sarah said, "Hey Zeke, I can't find my glasses." Zeke looked over at the girl and went over to where she had put them last night. They were missing, so Zeke looked up back at Sarah. They had to find her glasses. He knew that she couldn't see well without them. "Looking for these?" Troy said. Zeke looked back to the red rimmed glasses in Troy's hand. He had a smirk on his face. Don't you dare, Zeke said with an angry look on his face. In one move, Troy threw the glasses on the ground and crushed him under with his boot.